Okay, good morning, everyone from Singapore. I'm very happy today to start the week with a very interesting topic: adopting digital health, identifications in healthcare. Today, I'm happy to introduce you our three speakers. Evelyn Ong, she's a market development manager at Avery Dennison. Then we have Adrien Timsit with us from NXP, and Manan Hathi, who is Regulatory Affairs Manager from Stryker. So this is a very interesting topic for us. And if you can go back just one slide. Yeah, thanks. We are going to have an introduction from Evelyn. Then Adrien will illustrate a few case studies from the healthcare sector and beyond. How is digital identification being used today? What is working? What is still, a little bit a challenge? And then we will go to the medtech industry. Manan will provide an overview of the regulatory landscape and still, tell us what can be done in the future to facilitate the adoption of these digital unique identifications in healthcare. So that being said, I just want to give you a very simple technical instruction. Next slide. So if you want to interact with our speakers, you are welcome to. Please use the chat function. We will have roughly 10 minutes at the end of the three presentations for us to discuss with the speakers. So feel free to leave your question in the chat. Next. As you can imagine, this webinar is part of the initiative of APAC-Med in the digital health field. I just want to remind you that APAC-Med established the Digital Health Committee last year. The committee now embraces more than 60 companies from the medical technology industry. Roughly 2/3 are MNCs, but we also have representatives from SMEs and startups in the field. We came together with two main objectives in digital health. One is to create and share knowledge, and the other one is to advocate for regional policies that can enable digital health. So we work on several areas that you can see here: cybersecurity, interoperability, reimbursement of digital health, regulatory frameworks, and so on. With that, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Evelyn, for her introduction on the topic today. Thanks a lot, Evelyn, for being with us, and over to you now.
Thank you, Roberta, good morning, everyone, and good evening, Manan. So let's start off with, today I'll be sharing more about digital identification in the healthcare space. Next slide, please. And before I start, let me give a quick overview of my company. And I'll be touching on some of the use case and why RFID and NFC is popular. And I'll touch on a couple of case studies before I hand over to my next speaker from NXP. Next slide. So just a little bit about the company that I'm from. I'm from Avery Dennison. Avery Dennison is a Fortune 500 US company based out of Glendale, California. We are a global label science company who manufactures all sorts of different labels for all sorts of industries. I am from a division called Avery Dennison Smart Track that offers digital identification solutions. So over here, we do believe in big data. We believe in a vision where every physical item will eventually have a digital identity and a digital life. It is not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when that's going to happen. Next slide, please. So just a bit more, we have been in this business for a long time. About 20 years ago, we started helping the industry develop the standards. And today, we are the world's largest UHF RFID partner. We have global R&D capabilities. We have innovation all the time. And in terms of manufacturing capacity, we are the largest in the world, and we have quite a lot of certification of quality and compliance to different sectors and different industries. Next slide. And so now I'm going to touch on the healthcare industry proper. Next slide, please. And I'm going to start by recognizing that there are issues in healthcare. As with any industry, there are always a lot of issues. But the issues that I'm going to touch on today is where we believe that the technology RFID is able to assist. So let's start with, so I've consolidated into three main blocks, main categories of issues. And the first one is incomplete supply chain visibility. So we are aware that there are counterfeit drugs. There are gray markets, there are diversion problems, there are product loss due to expiration date or environmental impacts, you know, and that there are out of stock situations. So this is actually very common in the pharmaceutical world, in the healthcare world. And with RFID, we do believe that, you know, once we put a digital identity at the beginning where the product is being manufactured and we keep a close eye on it in terms of tracking and tracing, we will be able to help resolve some of these problems. The second issues in healthcare, we believe, is the incomplete visibility of inventory and assets. In a hospital setting, for example, medical equipment and devices are often misplaced or get lost. And what do hospitals do? They just buy more, right? So no visibility of the assets within the environment. And also, how about medical trays and cards as well? So all this translates to additional costs for hospitals and healthcare providers. The third part is the missing connectivity to patients or drug takers or access. As of today, they can issue the drug, they can prescribe the drug, and that's where the connectivity ends, the digital connectivity ends. We're not sure how the patient respond to it unless they report to the caregiver. But with digital identification, we do believe that there is access for two-way traffic where patients will have information from about the drugs from the pharmaceutical companies, and there is also a way for them to feed back information back to the pharmaceutical company. So we do believe that all of these are very powerful, and the following few slides will show you the technology that's behind these possibilities. Next slide, please. Now, the few slides will be a little technical, not too technical. We're going to touch on the different types of digital identification technologies that's available in the world right now. This is also relevant to Manan's presentation, because Manan is going to talk more about UDI, and the UDI regulation by FDA did mention a few of this digital identification. So I'll just touch on the basic technical side of things. Next slide, please. So now, this is a chart of what we call evolution of digital identification. Everyone knows barcode, everyone knows QR code, so I'm not going to touch more about it. But it's also a form of identifying an item. So a progression or evolution in this space would be RFID. RFID stands for radio frequency identification. And then the other one is NFC, near field communication. The next two slides, I'm going to talk more about the differences, but right now just bear with me with all the acronyms. And moving forward, we do believe that there is going to be printed electronics and sensors and Bluetooth and all sorts of hybrid of technologies that's going to be used. For the purpose of today's presentation, I'll not be talking about the last two technologies. Actually, a lot of these technologies are not quite that mature yet. So we're going to talk more about UHF RFID and NFC for the purpose of today's presentation. Next slide, please. So let's start with the acronym RFID. RFID stands for radio frequency identification. And the definition is that it is automatic and is a wireless transfer of data. And it uniquely identifies each item. So it's different from barcode. If you remember barcode, if you go to the supermarket, you buy 2 bottles of water, you have to scan twice. But for RFID, you don't have to scan twice because each item will have their own unique identification. So it just reads everything. So everyone would have a digital ID. All right. Next slide, please. Now, NFC, in addition to RFID, is also a form of wireless communication. NFC stands for near field communication. It is of a slightly different standard compared to RFID. And you can see the logo on top right. This standard is administered by NFC Forum. Okay, the biggest difference between RFID and NFC is that NFC, you're able to use your phone to read the information in the chip. And RFID requires a dedicated device. So in Singapore, you know, right now we are the safe entry. We used to use QR code, right? But now there are more and more restaurants and places with that device there. That's actually using NFC for you to tap on it, and it communicates the information wirelessly from the phone to the device. Next, please. So this is just an overview of just to show you how common RFID is. It's not new technology. It's just it has been used in so many areas, just that we don't really think much about it. If you have shopped in Decathlon, in Uniqlo, anywhere in the world, next time take a look at the price tag, or try to understand how the checkout function works. So all this is possible because of RFID. And in Singapore, the ERP and the EasyLink card and all these are different forms of RFID, some with battery, some with isn't. But the core technology behind all this is RFID. So it's really not, we're not talking about something new. It's just the application of it is something is new. Next slide, please. And I just want to share with you, these are a couple of brands that you guys probably find it familiar. And these are the big brands that have started their digital transformation journey. So you might not be able to see all of it in Asia because such big brands, when they roll out in different phases. So, and you know, these international brands, by the time they come to Asia, it will be probably phase 2 or phase 3 or later on. But there are work being done to transform their digital supply chain, or they have already started you know, embarking on pilots of 1 or 2 items. Next slide, please. So this is a summary, a cheat sheet of the different types of digital identification. This cheat sheet to me is very useful because we do ask very often, when do we use barcode? When should we use QR code? When do we RFID NFC? So it really depends on what you require, what your application needs, and what challenges you're trying to solve. There are differences, there are benefits of and pros and cons of each options. So the last point that I say, I'm not going to touch on barcode and QR code as I mentioned much. Both requires a line of sight, as you can tell, but RFID and NFC doesn't. It's wirelessly. It penetrates through items. So you have a carton of, say, 10 cartons of drugs. The RFID system will be able to penetrate, the signals will be able to penetrate the carton boxes and read everything within seconds. So that's the beauty of wireless technology. All right. And also the last point, I just want to highlight again that the main difference between RFID and NFC is RFID require like a dedicated reading device, very much like those guns that we see in supermarket. But NFC, you can use your mobile phone. So to the consumer side, if you want to link to your consumer, then, you know, it's very clear that you might want to look at NFC. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's look at the applications of digital identification in healthcare. Next slide will be a short video, just a 2-minute video of a high-level overview of how RFID is being used in healthcare. Let's watch before we move on to the next slide.
Now more than ever, we need certainty, accuracy, and safety. In a world of mass data and information, Avery Dennison has done just this. RFID and NFC technologies in pharmaceutical and healthcare industries help to provide better tracking and tracing, enhance inventory accuracy, improve asset management, and authenticate products. All of this prioritizes patient safety, health, and well-being. With RFID, we can create smarter supply chains, tagging medicine from the start, tracking it through distribution, ensuring inventory is accurate and authentic, and giving brands confidence it will be delivered to the right location on time. Ensuring pharmacies and hospitals have kits with the correct items at the correct temperature, and patients can be easily connected too, from the comfort of their own homes. With custom notifications detailing everything they need to know about their items, being able to track and trace products with full visibility, knowing when the delivery has been sent, in transit, or nearly at your door, reassuring you every step of the way, without diversion, and delivered with efficiency and speed. Once in a hospital or pharmacy, inventory management and quick scanning ensures accurate product allocation, which reduces human error and drastically improves efficiency, allowing caregivers to focus on those that need them most, their patients. The insight provided by patient connectivity not only informs patients, but also helps suppliers gain better market understanding, meaning tracking is made easier and forecasting is more accurate. As the world's largest RFID partner, Avery Dennison helps bring the transformative power of digital ID technologies to the healthcare industry. Get in touch to speak to our experts.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So what did we watch? So this is a quick summary of what of the video that we have watched. So the top 3 use case of RFID NFC can be quickly summarized into 3 main blocks. One is track and trace. So from the video, it explained that if you put a digital identification at the point of manufacturing, you will be able to track it digitally, automatically throughout the entire supply chain. And that is very powerful because problems like authentication and counterfeiting and diversion, it all happens in the supply chain layer. So once you have a very close capture of the journey it takes in the entire supply chain, it will be very difficult for counterfeit drugs to penetrate the supply chain. So same thing can be said for medical device tracking and tracing. So the next point would be inventory management. Inventory management in the healthcare space would be related to expiration management or recalls management. So having digital identity and having all this information on the cloud will proves to be very efficient and very useful in cases where there's product recalls or expiration. And then finally, the consumer engagement. As you can see, there's e-leaflets. So, you know, everything is going to be digital. Everything is going to be on the phone. You don't have to unfold your leaflets. And if it's connected to the phone, the app can send you reminders to take your dose. And, you know, there is also a way for the patients to interact back to the caregiver. Next slide, please. So I'll move on to 4 case studies of actual examples of where digital identification technologies have been used around the world. And I've selected these 4 because it's very typical. And I think it will be very relevant to this audience we have today. So the first case study that I'm going to talk about is Medline. These 2 are videos, but I'm not going to play the video in the interest of time. If you're interested, you can just go to YouTube and Google Medline RFID, right? You'll be able to see that. But I'm just going to talk through the inventory solution. So Medline, as you know, is one of the world's largest provider of surgical packs. And this RFID solution is used onto one of the product line, which is the SPT, sterile procedure trays. So sterile procedure trays are those bundles of blue package with all the equipments and consumables needed for that particular procedures. So just to give you the kind of volume that Medline produces, at one plant, they manufacture or they produce about 100,000 of such bundles. And they also have to manage a total of 25,000 components that goes into different bundles. So it's actually quite a massive operations. And also accuracy is very important. And you know, surgical packs falls into that category that we call is very suitable for RFID because it looks visually identical. It looks visually identical. Everyone looks like a blue bundle. And that's where identification is very important because once you wrap it out, you stick a label on it, you are not supposed to open it. These are sterile. So because of that, the importance of proper labeling, proper identification in the entire process from packing into the pack into labeling has to be very accurate. So it's a bit different from retail, right? Retail, if you know the label outside, you say that it's supposed to be a red shoe. You can open it up and see a black shoe. So you know there's something wrong there. But in this case, there isn't a visual audit that you can do. And that's why labeling is very important. So that's why Medline has started, they have looked into RFID for a while, and they have implemented RFID to ensure that the entire process in the manufacturing plant, all the way to distribution, is properly tracked and errors are reduced. Next slide, please. So case study 2 is somewhere closer to home. Hanmi Pharmaceutical is one of Korea's largest pharmaceutical companies. They have started RFID since 2009. And up to today, it is fully rolled out, fully implemented, and the scale just keep increasing. So next slide, please. Again, there is a very long video, very cool video of the entire implementation. And I'm not going to show it, but I will just point out some of the highlights. So the video will show you where the RFID label is being introduced, and that is at the packaging level. So there's the bottle and there is the carton box that it goes in, right? So that's where they start tracking it from the point of manufacture of the finished product. And then after that is being packed into carton boxes. Carton boxes will have a digital identification, digital identity as well. And from the carton box, it goes into the pallet level. And that's where the distribution, the dispatching starts. And at every step of the point, at every nodes of the supply chain, there will be a read capture, so that it will be captured digitally and the software will be able to capture all the different steps of the way. And the reason for doing in such a tight manner is because they want to have full visibility. They want to know where the bottlenecks, they want to know where the products at all times and which customer. So all this tracking is done all the way to the pharmacy level. And once you start tracking, you'll be able to trace back to the source. So having information digitally is actually a very powerful asset for any company. Next slide, please. So on the third case study, again, this is even closer to home, is in Thailand. There is a company called Identify RFID who has devised a smart cabinet setup. So this smart cabinets goes into hospitals, and within the smart cabinets are all sorts of consumables and drugs. So how it works is pharmaceutical companies do not sell such items to hospitals. It's actually by consignment. So as and when the hospitals consume these items, then they will bill it. Before the world of RFID comes in, it's a very manual process. They have to send someone there to do stock take every week. And they have no idea how much is being consumed or if it's lost. And more often than not, there will be disputes between the pharmaceutical companies and the hospitals. So by putting RFID tags in it and having the cabinet transform into an intelligent cabinet, they have full visibility of the kind of inventory they have at all times, the quantity, the type. And with the door access, they even know which department consumes the type of consumables at all times. So this has been rolled out to, I think as of now, maybe more than 50 hospitals in Thailand. And both pharmaceutical companies and hospitals are very pleased with the system. Okay, my last case study of the day before I head over to Adrien would be something about test kit. So of course, in times today, we have to talk a little bit about COVID, right? There are a lot of COVID test kits right now, and COVID test kits are, you've probably read in the papers that there are a lot of issues with authenticity. Or parallel imports, or not from the real manufacturer, or expired, or things like that. So we have worked with a company called Suku. It's a blockchain startup and uses a technology called blockchain to develop a digital verification technology to authenticate COVID-19 test kits and PPE. So the cool thing about blockchain is it forces the supply chain to be very transparent. And when there's so much transparency, and this is using NFC, it will enable the consumer the ability to use a cell phone to tap on the product and to tell you whether the product that you're about to buy is an authentic, or it will even provide some information as to the source of it or when it's being manufactured by which plant. So such examples are very common. And you know, we're happy that we can see technology being applied to today's world, today's time. So with that, I end my presentation. I'll hand over to Adrien.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. So small introduction. So I'm Adrien Timsit. I work in NXP Singapore as a business development manager. So basically, NXP is a spin-off of Philips Semiconductor. So we merged then with a large company called Freescale, and we have been established in 2006. So we are in NASDAQ. We are quite a big company with about 30,000 employees. And what we do is mostly we do semiconductors, so microchips. Our chips are mostly known for their usage in automotive, but also in security and contactless for what is a matter today. So actually, NFC is the founding member of the NFC technology. And we are also the main supplier of RFID microchips that are being used in labels, such as the one presented earlier. Next slide, please. So as Evelyn just said, clearly in those days of pandemic, the topic of COVID-19 and of COVID-19 vaccines and all the frauds that are currently happening and that are already happening on all the vaccines is actually quite important. There is various individuals or organization, criminal organization that organize a distribution of fake or outdated vaccines and which actually endanger both the health but also the success of the fight against the pandemic. So what we see is that some vaccine manufacturers have implemented those NFC labels, usually positioning it just under the flask sticker. Those NFC labels, they are able to provide all the traceability and tracking informations, the batch numbers, the production date, etc. But it's also a secured label. So it's enabling you to authenticate the product, the vaccines, using similar cryptographic mechanism that you find in a smart card for access card, for example. So those labels, they have the capacity to be read both online or also offline, and therefore do not require necessarily a connectivity to be able to authenticate the product, but also to read the information about it. So we also have some concept used by some vaccine manufacturer that also use multiple sticker on a flask in order to issue a relevant sticker to the vaccination booklet of the person. So this concept is overall used to enable traceability authentication, but also to perform this last step just before inoculation and without any specific training, since people can use it just by tapping their smartphone on the tag. So next slide, please. So here again, we want to talk more about NFC. So of course you can use it to continue the traceability of your product, but also you can use it in order to protect your IP. So for example, in this device, we have an NFC reader that is both in the device, but also in the cartridge. So why do you put it in the cartridge? It's in order to be able to authenticate that the consumable is actually a genuine consumable. How many shots are there left in the cartridge? And how many shots do you need to use before refilling it? So it also can be used in order to modify the setting of the device. You will be able to calculate the engine speed, pressure, temperature, etc. Eventually, it can also write inside the consumable to say there is only 3 shots left in this consumable. Of course, this is a concept for a glucose meter, but you can use that for many other items, infusion bags, diagnostic equipments, etc. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is actually quite a good example of actually a manufacturer for test analyzers of COVID-19 actually, who wanted to initially use those labels for identification purpose, for tracking purpose, but then they realized that they could actually do other things with this NFC label. So what they do is that they connect this NFC tag to the core system, and it is used to follow up the communication all along the manufacturing process. So for example, you are able to know what is the stage of manufacturing. You are able to use this NFC interface to upload your firmware, to upload your software, and to configure the parameters of this machine. So one very important point is that actually when you manufacture this kind of machines, they all have slightly different calibration due to the manufacturing process. And you are able to individually recalibrate via your mobile phone, via this NFC interface, your machine. So on top of identification here, there is really some features that have been used to participate to the manufacturing and the calibration of the equipment itself. Next slide, please. Okay, so still actually on the vaccination topic, what we see is that when we use an identification tag, we can also add some more measurement tools inside, such as sensors. So what we can do is that we connect a sensor to the tag, and when you are performing a reading with your mobile phone or tablet, you will also activate the sensor and take a measurement. Okay, so it can also be powered with a battery and take a measurement a long time to ensure, for example, in the case of vaccination, that the temperature has been stable all along the process. So what it means is that every, let's say, 24 hours, the tag will automatically read the temperature of the batch or of the flask of the vaccine to be able to log every step of the way what was the temperature of storing at that moment. So when it's read by the end user, for example, the hospital at the end of the chain or the inoculator, you are able to say, okay, this vaccine has completely followed the cold chain and was never broken. And if it was broken, then we're able to know where this cold chain has been broken, and we are able to act on it. This is just an example on temperature, but there is dozens of small sensors that you can use in various equipment. You have pressure sensor, moisture sensor, pH sensors that can all be connected to a smart label, especially NFC, but in some cases also with RFID. Next slide, please. So here it's another example of sensors. So it's slightly different. So in injection pen and inhaler, you have some particular way to inoculate it, and in some cases, a wrong intake of the medicine will result in a wrong dosage of the medicine. So, for example, if you don't use your injection pen correctly, you may reduce the amount that you should actually get given by 50%. It's the same for inhaler. If you do not use it correctly, you might take too much of the product. So, for example, inhalers, sometimes they use corticoids, and that can be an issue. So I did a sensor with an NFC connected tag. It's enabling the patient to have live feedback via an app or a smartphone, for example, that is positioning correctly or not the device, but also will give him, on the long run, every time he's tapping his smartphone, he's able to see that he has, on average, the past week, consumed maybe 20% less than he was supposed to use. And to follow up is actually number of record of those that taken, etc. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a bit more consumer interaction use cases where we have seen in those nicotine spray, the manufacturer including an NFC device on the package. So, of course, this NFC tag is used for identification all along the way of the manufacturing process and distribution, but it's also being used by the user to interact with it and to maybe use a user manual, but mostly to follow up, for example, his consumption. Okay, so he's able to, to register all this information. How many times has he taken it today? How many cigarettes has he smoked in the past 7 weeks, and to follow up this usage. And actually, this is not only useful for the users, it's actually very useful for the company, for the brand, because all those information, all those data about the consumption, about the usage of their product is therefore recorded and is used later for big data analysis. So what I wanted to show you with these different use cases is that NFC can also be used and can enrich your product with new features. I think now I will give the mic to Manan.
Thank you, Adrien and Evelyn, for those excellent presentations. I'm going to talk about a slightly different tack, taking more of the regulatory approach on what are regulators doing from a unique device identification standpoint. So first of all, I am Manan Hathi. I work for Stryker. For those who don't know, Stryker is a global medical device company, largely focused on the surgical space. We make a whole lot of surgical instruments and everything from hand tools to surgical lights and video management systems that are installed into the operating room. So um, yeah, I am the senior manager for regulatory affairs at Stryker, primarily responsible for two areas. One is digital health, regulatory processes, and also I'm the global process owner for establishing global unique device identification strategy for the corporation. So I'll be talking briefly about the latter aspect, the UDI today, and how it applies to medtech devices from a regulatory standpoint. Next slide, please. So what is UDI, right? So let's start at the basics. My colleagues gave an excellent presentation on the technologies that are used in an automatic device identification. However, when you look at the regulatory aspect of it, when you look at the current state of medical device technology, right, in the absence of UDI, what you see is many of the challenges with traceability and tracking of medical devices, because each device is given its own catalog number by its parent company, right? And they have their own identification system that, when taken together, is anything but unique. So from a regulatory standpoint, what healthcare providers and regulators are looking for is if they have to verify that the device that they're getting is actually the correct device, or if they have to report a problem that happens to the device, they want an easy way to identify that device and get that information back to the manufacturer. And that's where UDI comes in, right? So UDI is essentially a system that that provides for uniquely identifying any medical device all the way from manufacturing through distribution and use, and really throughout its entire life cycle. So we'll see how this is done in a moment. But indeed, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum has actually published some guiding principles that are that aim to globally harmonize the regulations around the world. Another point is UDI is primarily a labeling requirement, although it is a little bit more than that, and we'll talk about that. But it's a labeling requirement in that the label of the device must bear the UDI of the device. And that is how it is conveyed and consumed by consumers. So can we go to the next slide, please? So just how does UDI provide unique device identification, right? So really it does this by breaking the UDI code into two parts, right? One is a fixed mandatory portion of the UDI, which is called the device identifier. And that really is identifying the specific version or model of the device, right? So it's usually issued by a special accredited issuing entity. GS1 is an example. There's also HIVIC and ICPA, but generally it is an accredited issuing entity that provides a global numbering scheme, such that they are responsible to make sure that when you are assigned a number, no other medical device is given that same number. The issuing agency usually complies. There are certain standards that they have to comply with, and that's what the regulatory bodies use to to accredit them for as an issuing entity. But there are several entities that are used, as I mentioned. So what happens is a manufacturer would set up a contract with one of these issuing entities, let's say GS1, and then they can purchase the unique code for their device. The GS1 specific code is called what's called people might have heard about this term. It's a global trade identification number. So that number is unique once it's assigned to any particular device. Right? The other part of the UDI is sort of the variable portion, right? So that's where it goes down to the specific unit. So if you remember, the device identifier is the specific model or version of the device. The production identifier goes down to the specific unit. Whether it be a serial number, in which case it goes down to the actual there can be no device with one DI and one serial number. There can be only one device for that, right? So there can be no other device that mimics that. Or it can go down to the lot or batch number or manufacturing date, what have you. So that's basically how you can go down to identifying a given device completely uniquely, right? In the next slide, we will go into a little bit more detail on what are the production identifiers. So as mentioned, UDI is a labeling requirement, in that the labeling has to have the UDI, and basically what regulators generally and DRF and other regulators that have implemented UDI are going for is it needs to have the information presented in two forms. One is the human readable information, and the other is the automatic identification data capture. That's some of the technologies that Evelyn and Adrien went through. That falls into that domain. So the human readable interpretation is usually placed under or next to the AIDC information that's there, and the way the information is conveyed is every issuing entity has got these application identifiers that are entered in human readable form to identify the set of alphanumeric characters that are coming after it. So if you look on the slide on the top, the numbers in parentheses are what's the application identifiers. So when you say 01, that refers to the G10 or the global raised identification, and these are the application identifiers used by GS1. 17 is the expiration date. So you can see that the expiration date here is 31st December 2020, for example. 10 is the batch or lot number, and then 21 is a serial number. So there are other application identifiers out there, but this is how it makes it easy to identify the alphanumeric characters that represent the G10 of the manufacturing date, for instance. And the automatic information and data capture technology, the regulators don't mandate which technology we use for providing this information. It's just that it can be either a barcode or a 2D barcode or an RFID or even an NFC. Those are mainly the four technologies that currently can be used for capturing UDI information. So next slide. So we've been talking a lot about UDI being a labeling requirement, but as I alluded to before, it's more than a labeling requirement in the sense that it is also applicable to the actual device itself. Along with establishing the unique device identifier, the UDI system also establishes what's called a UDI database. And what that database holds is a whole bunch of static data elements that are given to that specific device. For instance, for a medical device, it would be, is the device sterile? Is the device supplied sterile? Is the device required to be sterilized before use if it is not supplied sterile? Are there any specific clinical sizes? Are there any special storage and handling requirements? So depending on the regulator, there can be a whole bunch of data elements that we submit. Just as an example, FDA's Good ID database requires about 64 data attributes to be submitted. When in Europe, that's the system they are putting together requires about 140 data attributes. So that can vary a lot. But the idea is that when the user scans that AIDC barcode, they are taken directly to this public database where they can find all the information they need to find on how they need to use the device. So next slide, we'll go into the benefits of UDI. And really, I'm not going to go through all of the bullet points here, but it's uncanny how this aligns so well with Evelyn's slides on and Adrien's case studies, where really the primary reason why regulators are going towards this is the tracking risk, right? For the first part, it provides traceability of devices. It provides for a way to make sure that the devices that hospitals are using are authentic and and are not proud of it. The second thing it provides is, and I think Evelyn mentioned, product recalls, right? So it does enhance the effectiveness of post-market safety activities, such as, what it's using field safety corrective actions, which is basically the need for recalls. And if you have any problems with the devices, to report them appropriately. And it definitely provides for good stock management by health institutions to identify which devices they have and whether they need to, let's say, order more consumables or whatnot. So next few slides, what I'm going to do is sort of give you an overview of how UDI, what the state of UDI is around the world. So we'll start off with USA. The USA is the most mature market in terms of UDI regulation. The FDA UDI rule became effective in December 2013. It was supposed to have completed implementation by 2020. However, as everybody knows, 2020 was a very interesting year. So their deadlines have not been extended, but FDA said that they won't enforce that requirement until about 2022. So it's been extended a little bit, but as the most mature system. And they have, I mentioned earlier, that they maintain a global unique device identification database, or in short known as Udi, which houses attributes that a regulated product that's launched in the US has to submit to that database. So next slide, we'll talk about UDI in the EU, which is more actively being implemented right now. It's part of the EU MDR regulation, if folks have heard about it. This activity has been going on for some years now. They're establishing this European database for medical devices called UDIMED. This is where I'm talking about they have more attributes than the US. The real reason is that US is really looking at it as a unique device identification database strictly, where UDIMED is looking at this as creating a database for all things medical devices, including clinical studies and post-market surveillance reports, and a way for all the European national competent authorities to provide post-market surveillance. So they're looking at a more holistic database than just unique device identification. So that's the reason for the high number of attributes. They're also introducing sort of a new concept called the basic UDI-DI, which is it's more than just UDI-DI, which I said is one single model or version of a device. Basic UDI-DI groups similar models into one if they have the same risk class, if they have the same characteristics in terms of intended use and things. Then they're giving it one identifier. So they sort of have a family level, and then they have the individual level, and then they have individual APIs. The UDIMED is work in progress. They're working to establish modules. Some modules are available, others are not. I won't go into the detail on that in interest of time, but full compliance is sometime by May 2025 for EU. Next slides, I'm going to go into more closer to the APAC region with UDI in China. China rules were also released in about August 2019, and they are looking at a stepwise implementation. The first batch of products actually began to be submitted by January, and they've actually started looking at the next batch of products to be submitted. They are establishing a unique device identification database local to China as well. And the key point is that all these UDI databases are going to be open and shared, at least to some degree. If you go to the next slide, it doesn't stop there, right? UDI is something that is going to be around for some time. Since there is an INDRF level harmonization push, really UDI doesn't really work unless there is a globally harmonized set of requirements. you can't have unique identification if the identification schemes are different across jurisdictions. And this has clearly been shown, that Korea is using the INDRF guidelines, and they have published their UDI requirements. So Japan and Singapore and India and Saudi Arabia and Brazil, even Colombia. So there's a whole bunch of regulators that are looking to implement this UDI regulation across the board. And I'll end with my last slide here. And the next one, and it's primarily, just primarily guiding principles being that UDI has a lot of benefits. We do need a way of uniquely tracking, tracing, and identifying medical devices across its distribution and use. There are also challenges with implementation of UDI, especially for really small implants and things like that, which the industry is working through. The primary, if there's one thing I would take from here, is that UDI is a shared responsibility. It's not just manufacturers that have to worry about it, it's also hospitals. Because we can have the best technology implemented in our labels, but if hospitals don't have the means to read it, it's not going to be much usable, right? I think this was my last slide, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Manan, and thanks, Adrien and Evelyn, for the insightful presentations. And I love the parts on the case studies, because I think we can all learn from what is happening across the industry. So I would like to spend the last 10 minutes discussing with you today. We have a few questions from the attendees that we received in the chat, but I would like to ask something very general but specific for our industry, right, Manan? If we think about the members of APAC Med, and you covered that partially in your presentation, but what is your suggestion for a medical device company that is starting in the field of unique identification? What should they do?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And as it becomes more and more relevant, with regulators around the world, especially in APAC right now, are bringing on UDI regulation. I think the first thing is to identify a good issuing entity that they want to use for issuing their UDI codes, right? And having a contract with them and having those, if it's a GS1, their GTIN numbers identified. But other than that, it's really the data that are being asked for by all of these companies are not anything new. There are things that are already part of the requirements from a labeling perspective or whatnot, but trying to make sure that we gather all of that data together in one place and making sure it's all accurate and to submit to the regulatory bodies is really important. The challenges that I sort of referred to there are also important is identify, if you have like some really small non-sterile implants, because right now the industry is sort of facing a challenge on that side. It's because the way those implants are being used, it's difficult to provide the full UDI information at the point of use. And this is maybe where technologies by Avery Dennison that Evelyn mentioned that are coming up that might be actually helpful in addressing the challenge. Hope that answers that question.
Thanks very much, Manan. Yes, it does. Thank you. And I'm thinking also, because we received this question already 2 or 3 times in the chat, so I think people want to know, right? But how much does this cost? So who wants to take the question? Maybe Adrien, do you want to answer this question on the cost of RFID?
Yes, thank you, Roberta. Yeah, clearly this is a question that will always come back. I think to answer simply, there is 3 portions of cost, right? You have a back-end cost that you will have to manage anyway, whatever UDI system you are going to implement. So this one, let's say it's blank. You will have a front-end portion. So for example, the tag in the case of RFID or NFC, and you will have the infrastructure cost, okay? So when you're talking about the front-end cost, those tags, actually, for example, Decathlon is a worldwide sport manufacturer. The average price of an item is a few dollars, and they are tagging each and every one of them. So this is to show you, and this is the same with most retail apparel manufacturers for items that are a few dollars. They are tagging each and individually. So it means that the volume gets so big in this industry that now the average cost of a tag is actually very low. And finally, you have the infrastructure cost. So the infrastructure cost you have in RFID, you have some infrastructure cost because you need to have a reader, etc. This is not crazy. This is something that needs to be managed. And in the NFC case, you don't need a reader because your mobile phone has already absorbed this cost. So you have various answers. It's not a simple answer to give, but I would say that comparatively, those technologies give more value than they have cost. And just to add the last point, I think that is also the reason why I was presenting those NFC features is because if you want to finance your UDI transition and you can, and the NFC correspond to your identification use case, you are able to leverage on other departments within your company, the marketing department or the product department or other department to participate to the financing of this project because it brings value and brings a competitive advantage.
Thanks, Adrien. This is really helpful. So I was reading through the chat. There are a couple of questions still for Manan. So maybe Manan, I can direct them to you. So there is a first question on, okay, is there a UDI charter in Singapore and who is taking care? Is this related to GS1 as well? So would you like to cover this question, Manan?
Sure, I think as far as I can, but GS1 is really a global organization. They have been accredited by the China agency as well. I have not looked at the Singapore draft of regulation from UDI, but I suspect that GS1 would be certainly available to provide the UDI services for Singapore as well. I am not aware of any other that are.
Thanks, Manan. And the other question was, would you recommend any regulation to be considered in the healthcare industry in terms of digital identification?
Yeah, so if the regulatory bodies don't really mandate how you put the UDI carrier on the vehicle. So it could be technologies such as RFID, it could be technologies such as 2D and 1D barcodes. So there are any direct regulations that would come into play there. Now, certainly, if you're using RFID technology or high frequency technology, then there might be regulations that come in from that telecommunication standpoint. But as far as medical device regulations go, there isn't.
Thanks, Manan. And I think so. I also wanted to raise a point from the chat, and maybe Evelyn, I can ask you this, given your previous role in the organization. So, does the use of RFID on the products warrant the needs to get license from IMDA? Sorry.
Yes, IMDA. So just for those not in Singapore, IMDA is a regulatory to manage all the wireless technologies. So the quick answer is, as a user, you do not have to be concerned with this regulation from IMDA. It is the RFID device manufacturer, the one who's selling you the RFID reading devices like handheld, that needs to comply with IMDA. So all these are wireless technology, right? So before they can sell in Singapore or any other country, they need to get a type approval, very much like getting a license for selling cell phones. The labels that we have been talking about in this entire presentation does not require any licenses because it's a passive item, meaning it doesn't emit any frequency. So it is the devices that needs the license, but in terms of tagging it, like Decathlon, all these labels that you see in Uniqlo, those do not require any regulations from IMDA.
Thanks very much, Evelyn. And we are at the end of our webinar. So I want to thank you for the presentation today. I think we all learn a lot. This is a new topic for the Digital Health Committee, so maybe we should consider to focus on this more in the upcoming months. The recording will be available on our website. And if you want to get in touch with the speakers, please let me know and I'll be happy to make the intro. Thanks a lot. Have a lovely day and good night, Manan. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Always.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.